What if I told you that the reason you can't drop those last 10 pounds or, you know, shake that Tuesday morning brain fog has absolutely nothing to do with your willpower or your discipline or even your brain chemistry, really?
Right, which is what we've always been told, right?
Exactly. What if the entities actually calling the shots are trillions of microscopic hijackers just currently residing in your digestive tract?
I mean, I know it sounds like the plot of some weird science fiction movie, like this idea that we are essentially walking meat suits just being piloted by bacteria.
Yeah, totally.
But the reality that's emerging from modern gastroenterology and, well, neuroscience too, is actually far more complex. And frankly, it's just far more fascinating than a simple hijacking.
Yeah.
Because we aren't being piloted per se, but we are absolutely being influenced on a minute-by-minute basis.
Okay, let's unpack this because for the last, I don't know, 50 years, we as a society have been sold a very specific story about human biology.
Oh, absolutely.
We were told the body is a machine. If you're overweight, it's just a math problem, right? Calories in, calories out.
Yep. The classic thermodynamics argument.
Right. And if you're anxious and depressed, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. Like, oh, you just have a shortage of serotonin or dopamine. And we looked at the gut as nothing more than a biological plumbing system, just this tube that extracts nutrients and expels waste.
Just pipes.
Exactly, just pipes. But now researchers are realizing that tube is actually a bustling, highly intelligent ecosystem. So today, in this deep dive, we are tearing down that old mechanical view and really looking at the biological reality. We're treating this like a serious medical puzzle, mapping out exactly how the bacteria inside us influence our mood and our metabolism. And I want to promise you, the listener, this isn't going to be some dry lecture or a dense checklist of medical facts.
No, definitely not, because the goal here is to gradually uncover why this medical puzzle matters so much. We're going to treat this like a step-by-step discovery, starting with the big questions, tackling the common misunderstandings, and then, really digging into the actual medical mechanisms and real-world scenarios. The shift in perspective here just cannot be overstated.
Yep.
We're finally moving away from studying the human body in these isolated silos. It used to be, if your stomach hurt, you went to a gastroenterologist. If you felt depressed, you saw a psychiatrist.
Or an endocrinologist for your blood sugar.
Exactly. But what the microbiome research is really forcing us to accept is that those dividing lines, they just do not exist in nature. The immune system, the nervous system, the metabolic system, they are all deeply physically intertwined. And the gut microbiome is essentially the central switchboard connecting them all.
Well, let's start right there at the switchboard then, with a scenario that frankly probably plays out in doctors' offices thousands of times a day.
Oh, definitely.
So someone walks in and says, "Doc, I've been feeling this low-grade panic and brain fog for months. And at the same time, I'm exhausted, I'm craving sugar like my life depends on it, and the scale just keeps creeping up even though I'm eating the exact same way I always have."
Which is so frustrating for them.
So frustrating. And historically, that patient gets a prescription for an SSRI for the anxiety and then, a stern lecture about portion control for the weight.
Right, which is incredibly invalidating for the patient because they know their body, right? And they know something fundamental has shifted. What's fascinating here is that clinical presentation, that dual onset of metabolic stalling and psychological distress. That is exactly what is driving this massive wave of curiosity around the microbiome.
Because they're connected.
Yes, the patient is instinctively sensing what science is actually now proving, that their mood and their metabolism are tied to the exact same underlying biological disruption.
But I do want to push back on this a little bit, because as a skeptic, whenever I hear that one single thing is the root cause of every modern ailment, my alarm bells definitely go off.
Fair enough.
I mean, if our body is a complex city, we used to think of bacteria as just unwanted invaders. But now, this puzzle suggests they are literally part of the city's infrastructure. But we're talking about microscopic organisms, right? Bacteria, fungi, viruses. If they are just sitting in my colon, how are they dictating whether my body stores fat or burns it? Does this mean the laws of thermodynamics, the whole calories in, calories out equation, is just a lie?
Well, thermodynamics is a fundamental law of physics, right? Energy cannot be created or destroyed, so no, it isn't a lie. But the equation we use to calculate it in the human body is vastly more complex than we were taught in high school biology.
Okay, how so?
The flaw in the calories in, calories out dogma is the assumption that a calorie is processed the exact same way by every human body. We assumed that if you and I both eat a 500-calorie sandwich, we both absorb exactly 500 calories.
Right, because our plumbing is the same.
Exactly. But we aren't just plumbing. We have trillions of middlemen in the digestive tract who get to the food long before our body fully absorbs it. And depending on the specific profile of those middlemen, your unique microbial ecosystem, they might extract significantly more energy from that sandwich than mine do.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Furthermore, they release chemical byproducts that fundamentally alter your resting metabolic rate. So the math still applies, sure, but the bacteria are actively changing the variables in the equation. Mapping this out involves dynamic, living variables, which makes the answer far more complicated than it first appears.
That is just a staggering paradigm shift. I mean, it completely removes this heavy blanket of moral failing that we tend to place on people struggling with their weight or their mental health.
It really does. It's very empowering in that sense.
It is empowering, but because this idea is so empowering, it has also created a massive industry built on total misunderstandings. I mean, there's this tension between wanting a simple answer and the reality of a complex medical investigation. If the answer to our problems is inside the gut, people naturally want a quick fix.
Which leads us to probably the single most pervasive myth in modern wellness culture today.
The probiotic pills.
Exactly. This idea that you can simply swallow a capsule of quote-unquote good bacteria and it will magically recolonize your gut, cure your anxiety, and melt away body fat.
Yeah, the daily probiotic supplement. I mean, you see them everywhere, in every pharmacy, heavily marketed by influencers online. You buy a bottle with, 50 billion CFUs, colony-forming units of some unpronounceable bacteria, and you assume you are fixing the plumbing. Why is that logic so flawed?
Let's use an analogy. Imagine your gut microbiome is a sprawling ancient metropolis. We are talking about trillions of permanent residents representing thousands of different species. They have established neighborhoods, deeply entrenched supply chains, complex political alliances.
Okay, a huge city.
Right. Taking a standard off-the-shelf probiotic supplement is the equivalent of dropping a busload of tourists into the middle of Times Square.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Tourists. So wait, they don't move in?
Almost never. I mean, they might wander around for a few days, interact with a few locals, maybe spend a little currency, but then they are flushed out of the system.
Oh, wow.
They do not buy real estate,
Right.
they do not set up permanent residence, and they certainly do not fundamentally change the infrastructure of a city of trillions.
Wait, if they don't stick around, how can the supplement industry make all these massive claims about gut health? Are the probiotics doing anything at all?
Well, they can have transient effects. While those tourists are passing through, they might secrete certain enzymes or temporarily lower the pH of the gut, which can briefly suppress a pathogen or help with acute diarrhea, which is why probiotics are genuinely great after a bout of food poisoning.
Right, that makes sense.
But they are not rewriting your biological map. The assertion that a generic probiotic can cure clinical depression or reverse obesity just defies basic ecological logic. You cannot plant a delicate flower in a toxic landfill and expect to bloom.
That's a great way to put it. So the focus on the tourists completely ignores the environment they're being dropped into.
Exactly.
If someone has a diet composed entirely of ultra-processed foods, they have chronic stress, poor sleep, their internal metropolis is essentially a war zone.
Precisely. And this is where we really have to talk about diversity. Moving past these wrong assumptions is the only way to actually understand the true medical mechanisms at play here. In ecological terms, whether you are looking at the Amazon rainforest or the human colon, resilience comes from diversity.
Right.
A healthy microbiome isn't just about having a high number of one specific good bacteria. It's about having hundreds of different strains that perform different jobs. Some break down toxins, some produce vitamins, some reinforce the physical barrier of the gut lining.
And if we look at modern society, our diversity is just plummeting. I was reading about studies comparing the microbiomes of modern Americans to the Hadza hunter-gatherer tribes in Tanzania.
Oh, the Hadza studies are fascinating.
Yeah. The Hadza have microbiomes that look like dense, thriving rainforests. They're teeming with microbial life we don't even have names for yet.
Right.
Meanwhile, the average Western microbiome looks like a monocrop plantation. Just a few resilient species managing to survive in a highly processed environment.
And that loss of diversity is the true crisis. When you only have a few strains of bacteria, any disruption, a course of antibiotics, a week of intense stress, a bad stomach bug can completely collapse the ecosystem.
It's too fragile.
Exactly. And when people try to fix a collapsed ecosystem with a single strain probiotic, it's like throwing a bucket of water onto a forest fire. To actually understand how to fix this, we have to move past the marketing hype and look at the actual biological wiring. We have to look at the medical mechanisms.
So let's get into that. Let's stop talking in analogies for a second and get down to the actual flesh and blood. Because if the mechanism is so complicated, how do doctors even begin to figure out what's happening in the body? I mean, how does a microscopic organism sitting in the dark of my large intestine communicate with the neurons in my brain or the fat cells in my abdomen?
It's a great question.
Because bacteria don't have vocal cords, they don't have a nervous system. What is the physical mechanism of this communication?
Okay, to understand the communication, we have to look at the superhighway connecting the two regions, which is the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
Yeah, the vagus nerve is a massive wandering bundle of nerve fibers, over 100,000 individual fibers, that originates in the brainstem and snakes its way down through your neck, across your chest, and wraps entirely around your digestive organs.
It's basically a literal physical fiber optic cable plugging the gut directly into the base of the brain.
Yes. And historically, medical science viewed the vagus nerve primarily as a top-down signaling system.
Like the brain telling the stomach what to do.
Right. We knew the brain sent signals down to the stomach to release gastric juices when you smelled food, or to, halt digestion entirely when you were in a fight or flight panic.
Sure.
But the absolute breakthrough in modern neuroscience was the discovery that up to 80 to 90% of the nerve fibers in the vagus nerve are actually afferent, meaning they carry signals bottom up, from the gut to the brain.
Okay, so the cable exists and the traffic is mostly flowing upwards, but how do we know the bacteria are the ones sending the signals? I mean, it's one thing to say the gut talks to the brain, it's another to blame the microbes themselves.
This is where we have to look at some of the most profound experiments in modern medicine, specifically the work done with gnotobiotic, or germ-free mice.
Germ-free mice.
Yeah, these are animals born via C-section in completely sterile environments, raised in sterile isolators. They have never been exposed to a single microbe in their entire lives. They have zero microbiome.
So they are a completely blank slate.
Exactly. And researchers noticed something strange about these germ-free mice. Their baseline behavior was abnormal. They exhibited highly exaggerated stress responses, altered memory, bizarre risk-taking behaviors. It was as if their brains hadn't developed properly without the presence of bacteria.
That's wild.
But the real aha moment came when researchers took feces from a mouse that was genetically bred to be highly anxious, and they transplanted it into the gut of a germ-free mouse.
A fecal transplant.
Yes. And within a very short time, the previously calm, germ-free mouse began exhibiting severe anxiety. It started hiding, avoiding open spaces, showing massive spikes in stress hormones.
Wait, really?
Yes, they literally transplanted a psychiatric condition using only gut bacteria.
That is just unbelievable. But how did they prove it was the vagus nerve carrying that anxiety signal and not just, the bacteria secreting something random into the blood?
Because they did the experiment again, but this time they surgically severed the vagus nerve in the mice before introducing the anxious bacteria. And when the cable was cut, the anxiety did not transfer. The mouse remained calm. That was the definitive proof. The bacteria were physically utilizing the vagus nerve to hack into the brain's emotional centers.
But the bacteria aren't touching the nerve themselves, right? Because they're walled off inside the intestine. So what is the language they're using to send the signal across the barrier to the nerve?
The language is chemical.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we really have to look at what the bacteria eat. When you consume dietary fiber complex carbohydrates from vegetables, legumes, whole grains, your human digestive enzymes cannot break it down. It passes through your stomach and small intestine completely intact.
It's essentially just indigestible bulk to us.
To us, yes. But to the trillions of bacteria waiting in your large intestine, that fiber is an all-you-can-eat buffet. Through a process of fermentation, they consume that fiber. And just like any living organism, when they consume fuel, they produce a byproduct.
Okay, what do they produce?
In this case, the bacteria excrete molecules called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. The most famous ones are butyrate, acetate, and propionate.
Okay, I've actually seen butyrate mentioned on wellness blogs before. Why are these short-chain fatty acids so critical?
Because SCFAs are not just waste products. They are highly potent signaling molecules. Butyrate in particular is kind of a miracle molecule. First, it is the primary food source for your colonocytes, which are the cells that make up the lining of your colon.
Wait, our cells eat the bacterial waste?
Yes, without butyrate, those colon cells literally starve and undergo autophagy, causing your gut lining to break down.
So the bacteria feed the wall that keeps them contained?
Precisely. It's a brilliant symbiotic relationship.
Ah.
But these SCFAs don't just stay in the gut. They bind to specific receptors, G protein-coupled receptors, on the enteroendocrine cells lining the gut.
Okay.
These cells then release hormones and neurotransmitters that instantly stimulate the nerve endings of the vagus nerve, firing rapid signals up to the brain. Furthermore, some SCFAs actually slip into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and act as what we call histone deacetylase inhibitors.
Hold on, you're going to have to translate that. Histone deacetylase inhibitors. What does that actually mean for the listener?
It means the chemicals produced by your gut bacteria can travel to your brain and to your neurons and physically alter how your DNA is expressed. They can turn anti-inflammatory genes on and turn inflammatory genes off.
Just let that sink in for a second.
Hmm.
The broccoli you eat feeds a bacterium, which produces a chemical which travels to your brain and literally changes how your genetic code is read. I mean, that is mind-bending.
It really is.
But this brings us to a massive misconception I want to clear up, which is the serotonin myth. You hear this statistic constantly online. 90% of the body's serotonin is produced in the gut.
Oh, yes. I hear this one all the time.
Right. People hear that and they think, great, my gut bacteria makes serotonin, it floats up to my brain, and that's why a healthy gut cures depression. Why is that fundamentally wrong?
It's a very dangerous oversimplification. I mean, it is absolutely true that the enterochromaffin cells in your gut produce the vast majority of your body's serotonin, and that production is heavily stimulated by gut bacteria. However, serotonin is a large molecule. It physically cannot cross the blood-brain barrier.
I can't cross it at all.
No.
No.
The serotonin produced in your gut stays in your body. It regulates intestinal motility, how fast food moves, and it plays a big role in blood clotting and bone density. But it does not enter your brain to make you feel happy.
Then why does anyone care about gut serotonin when we talk about mood? If it's locked out of the brain, why is the microbiome central to psychiatric research right now?
Because while serotonin itself can't cross the barrier, its raw ingredients can. Specifically, an essential amino acid called tryptophan. You get tryptophan from your diet, from foods like turkey, eggs, oats. Tryptophan can cross the blood-brain barrier, where your brain then converts it into serotonin.
Okay.
But here is the catch. Your gut bacteria act as the air traffic controllers for tryptophan.
Okay, walk me through this air traffic control.
If you have a diverse, healthy microbiome producing lots of short-chain fatty acids, the environment in your gut is calm and anti-inflammatory. Under these conditions, the bacteria allow tryptophan to enter your bloodstream, cross into the brain, and become serotonin. You feel stable, focused, resilient.
Okay, but what if you don't have that calm environment?
Well, if your microbiome is degraded, if you lack diversity, or if you are eating a highly processed diet that starves the beneficial bacteria, the environment in your gut becomes highly inflammatory.
And what happens to the tryptophan when there's an inflammatory fire in the gut?
The inflammation triggers the release of an enzyme called IDO, indoleamine 2-col-3-dioxygenase. This enzyme acts like a rogue switch operator on the train tracks, desets circulating tryptophan and physically diverts it away from the serotonin pathway. Instead, it shunts the tryptophan down a completely different biochemical route called the kynurenine pathway.
So it steals the building blocks of happiness. What does it turn them into?
It turns them into carnitine and eventually into quinolinic acid, which are potent neurotoxins.
Neurotoxins.
Yes. And these molecules absolutely can cross the blood-brain barrier. Once inside the brain, they cause severe neuroinflammation, oxidative stress, neurotoxicity. High levels of these specific neurotoxins are heavily linked to severe depression, anxiety, and even neurodegenerative diseases.
That is an unbelievable mechanism. You aren't depressed because your brain forgot how to make serotonin. You are depressed because your gut is on fire, and your immune system is actively hijacking your serotonin building blocks and turning them into neurotoxins.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely redefines psychiatric care. You can pump someone full of SSRI to try and keep serotonin in the brain synapse longer, but if their gut inflammation is constantly turning all their raw tryptophan into neurotoxins, you are just bailing water out of a boat with a massive hole in the hull.
And what exactly causes that fire? I mean, we vaguely mentioned a degraded microbiome, but what physically happens to start this cascade of systemic inflammation?
It comes back to the physical barrier of the gut. Remember how we said beneficial bacteria produce butyrate to feed the colon cells? Let's say you stop eating fiber. You switch to a diet of fast food, refined sugars, zero roughage. You are literally starving your microbial workforce.
But they're living organisms. They aren't just going to quietly starve to death, right?
No, they are not. Survival is their only imperative. If you don't feed them dietary fiber, certain species of bacteria will turn to the next available carbon source, which is the thick, protective layer of mucus that coats the inside of your intestine.
Yikes.
Yeah. There are specific bacteria, like Akkermansia mucinifila, that naturally degrade mucin, which is healthy in normal amounts as it encourages the body to produce fresh mucus.
Mm.
But in a starved, low-fiber environment, the bacteria aggressively overconsume the mucus layer.
They literally start eating the walls of the city.
Yes. They eat away the protective barrier until they are right up against the delicate, single-cell lining of the intestinal wall. This triggers the breakdown of tight junction proteins, specifically proteins like occludin and zonulin, which are the biological glue holding your intestinal cells together.
This is what functional medicine doctors call leaky gut, right? Though I know traditional gastroenterologists prefer the term intestinal permeability.
Correct. When those tight junctions break open, the barrier is breached. And this is where the real danger begins, because of a molecule called LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. LPS is an endotoxin found in the outer membrane of certain bacteria in your gut.
Okay.
As long as LPS stays strictly inside the gut tube, it's mostly harmless. But when the gut becomes permeable, LPS leaks through the intestinal wall directly into the bloodstream.
And I'm guessing the immune system doesn't like that very much.
The immune system sees LPS in the blood as a massive 5-alarm biological threat. It thinks you have a systemic blood infection. It immediately deploys massive amounts of inflammatory cytokines, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, triggering systemic, low-grade chronic inflammation everywhere in the body.
Wow.
And that inflammation travels to the brain, triggering the tryptophan steal we just discussed, leading to the depression and anxiety.
But how does that leaky gut and systemic inflammation connect back to weight and metabolism? Because we promised to map both mood and weight today. We've shown how the bacteria hack the brain's emotional centers, but how do they hijack the fat cells?
Well, inflammation is one of the most potent drivers of metabolic dysfunction known to science. When your body is flooded with inflammatory cytokines due to circulating LPS, those inflammatory markers physically bind to insulin receptors on your cells. They block the insulin signal.
So insulin is like knocking on the door of the cell, trying to deliver glucose for energy, but the inflammation has changed the locks.
Exactly. This is the definition of insulin resistance. Because the cell can't hear the insulin, your blood sugar remains high. In a panic, your pancreas pumps out even more insulin. And insulin is essentially the body's primary fat storage hormone.
Right.
When insulin levels are chronically elevated, it chemically locks your adipose tissue, your fat cells, in storage mode. Your body simply refuses to burn stored fat, no matter how much you restrict your calories or exercise.
Which goes right back to the beginning of our conversation. This is why the calories in, calories out math feels like a cruel joke to so many people. If your gut is leaking LPS and your body is flooded with insulin, your metabolic engine is essentially running with the parking brake pulled all the way up.
And it gets even more complicated because the bacteria are also manipulating your appetite directly. There are profound mechanisms at play regarding the specific families of bacteria in your gut. Let's talk about the ratio of two major bacterial phyla, Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes.
I've actually seen these names in the research. What's the difference between them?
Think of them as two different metabolic profiles. Multiple studies, including some incredible research by Dr. Jeffrey Gordon's lab at Washington University, have shown that obese individuals tend to have a significantly higher ratio of Firmicutes compared to Bacteroides, while lean individuals have the exact opposite.
Why does that matter? Are Firmicutes inherently bad?
Not bad, just incredibly thrifty. Firmicutes possess specialized enzymes that are hyper-efficient at breaking down complex, indigestible carbohydrates. They can cleave bonds that our human bodies simply can't. In an evolutionary context, if you were facing a long, freezing winter with very little food, having a high level of Firmicutes would be a massive survival advantage because they squeeze every last drop of caloric energy out of a fibrous root or tuber.
Oh, wow. So if I have a Firmicutes dominant microbiome and my friend has a Bacteroides dominant microbiome and we both eat the exact same meal,
your Firmicutes will break down elements of that meal that your friend simply excretes as waste. Those bacteria turn that waste into absorbable energy, specifically through those short-chain fatty acids we mentioned, and deliver it directly to your liver, where it is converted into triglycerides and stored as fat. You are literally harvesting more calories from the exact same plate of food.
that is just mind-blowing. It entirely validates the lived experience of millions of people who say, I look at a piece of bread and gain weight while my friend eats pizza every day and stays thin. It's not a lack of discipline, it's an overzealous bacterial harvesting crew.
And the bacteria don't just passively harvest either. They actively tell your brain to eat more of the food they prefer. Certain bacterial byproducts interact directly with neuroendocrine cells to suppress the release of GLP-1 and PYY. These are the powerful satiety hormones that tell your brain you are full.
Wait, GLP-1? That's the exact hormone that all these massive new weight loss drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy are mimicking. Are you telling me the microbiome naturally regulates that?
Yes, it does. A healthy, diverse microbiome fed with complex fiber naturally stimulates the release of GLP-1, signaling profound fullness to the brain. A dysbiotic, inflamed microbiome suppresses it. Furthermore, some bacterial species, particularly those that thrive on simple sugars and refined carbohydrates, can secrete peptides that perfectly mimic human hunger hormones like ghrelin.
Mimic them.
Yes, they travel up the vagus nerve and hit the hypothalamus in the brain, triggering intense, overwhelming cravings for sugar.
It's like the bacteria are picking up the phone, ordering room service, and making you pay the biological bill.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. It is an evolutionary mismatch. The bacteria that thrive on fast food are sending distress signals when you try to eat a salad, essentially hijacking your nervous system to ensure their own survival.
Okay, we've covered an immense amount of deep biochemistry here. Let's bring this medical mechanism to life. Let's ground this in the real world and look at who is actually affected and why by exploring some realistic patient scenarios.
I think that's a great idea. Let's look at a classic case. Let's imagine a patient named Sarah. Sarah is 32 years old. She's at a healthy weight, has no history of mental health issues, and eats a fairly standard modern diet. She gets a severe sinus infection and goes to urgent care. The doctor prescribes her a strong 14-day course of a broad-spectrum antibiotic, like ciprofloxacin or amoxicillin.
A very standard medical intervention. She takes the pills, her sinuses clear up, everything is fine.
On the surface, yes. But over the next 3 to 4 months, Sarah's life subtly derails. She starts experiencing deep, lingering brain fog. Her sleep becomes fractured. She begins feeling a low-grade, constant thrum of anxiety that she's never felt before. And without changing a single thing about her diet or exercise routine, she slowly puts on 12 pounds.
And when she goes to her primary care doctor, her thyroid panels are normal, her blood sugar is normal, and she's probably just told she's stressed. Maybe she's offered an anti-anxiety medication. But based on our map, what actually happened in the Sarah's internal city?
The broad-spectrum antibiotic acted like a biological carpet bomb. It successfully wiped out the pathogenic bacteria in her sinuses, sure, but it also completely decimated the foundational infrastructure of her gut microbiome. The diversity plummeted.
So the complex rainforest was burned to the ground.
Exactly. And when the diverse fiber-fermenting bacteria died off, the production of butyrate stopped. Without butyrate, her colon cells began to starve. Her gut lining degraded, the tight junctions opened up, and she developed intestinal permeability.
Leaky gut.
Yes, the LPS endotoxins from the remaining opportunistic bacteria flooded her bloodstream. This triggered chronic, low-grade systemic inflammation. That inflammation traveled to her brain, activated the IDO enzyme, and began stealing her tryptophan, converting it into neurotoxic kynurenine instead of serotonin. That physical neuroinflammatory cascade is what Sarah experiences as sudden, unexplained anxiety and brain fog.
And the weight gain.
That same systemic inflammation bound to her cellular receptors, creating mild insulin resistance. Her body started locking away energy as fat. Furthermore, the decimation of her diverse microbiome left an ecological vacuum, which was likely filled by opportunistic, energy-harvesting firmicutes that thrived on whatever standard processed food she was eating. Her metabolic equation was fundamentally altered by a completely standard medical prescription.
It is terrifying how fragile the system can be.
Yeah.
But it also raises a massive question about vulnerability. I mean, why does an antibiotic ruin Sarah's metabolism, but her friend can take the exact same antibiotic for a UTI and bounce back in a week with zero side effects? Analyzing who is most affected really reveals that this puzzle is highly individualized.
It comes entirely down to baseline diversity and resilience. Think of the microbiome like a massive financial portfolio. If you have your investments perfectly diversified across thousands of different stocks, bonds, and real estate, and one sector of the economy crashes, you lose some money, but your portfolio survives. The other sectors hold you up.
But if your entire life savings is invested in one single highly volatile tech stock and it crashes, you are wiped out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If Sarah went into that antibiotic course with a monocrop microbiome, already diminished by years of a low-fiber, highly processed Western diet, she had no resilience. The antibiotic wiped out the few good strains she had left. But if her friend had a robust, highly diverse rainforest microbiome, the antibiotics certainly caused damage, but the surviving diversity was able to rapidly fill the ecological niches and restabilize the system before chronic inflammation could set in.
Let's look at another scenario that highlights the metabolic side. Let's imagine John. John is middle-aged, significantly overweight, and dealing with prediabetes. His doctor tells him he has to lose weight. So John decides to get healthy by following a highly restrictive, low-carbohydrate, low-fiber diet. He cuts out all vegetables and fruits because he's afraid of the sugar and subsists entirely on processed deli meats, cheese, and sugar-free protein shakes.
This is an incredibly common scenario. And initially, John might actually lose a few pounds of water weight, which encourages him. But within a few weeks, he hits a brick wall. His weight loss completely stalls. More importantly, he begins experiencing intense, almost violent cravings for sugar and refined carbohydrates. He feels irritable, exhausted, and eventually he binges on a box of donuts and completely falls off the wagon.
And John assumes he's a failure. He assumes he lacks the willpower to be healthy. But what is the biological reality of John's cravings?
John's restrictive diet actively starved whatever beneficial fiber-fermenting bacteria he had left. Remember, if you don't feed them, they die. Meanwhile, the highly processed nature of his diet, along with the artificial sweeteners in his protein shakes, actively selected for and fed a completely different population of bacteria-opportunistic strains that thrive in an inflammatory environment.
So he bred an army of microbes that basically demand junk food.
Precisely. And when John tries to rely on willpower to ignore his cravings, those opportunistic bacteria begin to starve. In response, they secrete stress molecules that travel directly up the vagus nerve to the brain. They suppress his GLP-1 fullness hormones and hyperstimulate his hunger signals. They literally manufacture a feeling of starvation in his brain, compelling him to seek out the specific simple sugars they need to survive. John isn't fighting a lack of willpower. He is fighting a deeply ingrained evolutionary survival mechanism triggered by trillions of screaming microbes.
Understanding these real-world patient scenarios naturally leads us to a very serious junction in our investigation. Because when a listener hears all of this, when they realize that their anxiety, their stubborn weight, their insatiable cravings might be tied to this microbial ecosystem, the immediate, completely human reaction is, I want to fix it, and I want to fix it right now. We want to manipulate the map. But we have to have a medically responsible discussion here about navigating the risks, the limitations, and the warning signs.
This is vital, because the science of the microbiome is revolutionary, but clinical application is still in its absolute infancy. We are like 16th century cartographers. We have roughly sketched out the major continents, we know the gut talks to the brain, but we do not have street-level GPS navigation yet. And people are trying to use this incomplete map to perform highly dangerous biological experiments on themselves.
Let's start with the limitations of testing, because right now you can go online, pay $200, mail a stool sample to a company, and they will send you back a beautiful, color-coded chart telling you exactly what bacteria you have, what foods you should never eat, and what specialized supplements you need to buy from them. Is that where the science actually is?
Emphatically, no. The commercial, direct-to-consumer microbiome testing market is fraught with massive limitations. Most of these kits use a technology called 16S RNA sequencing, which basically gives a rough, high-level overview of the major families of bacteria in your stool. But the microbiome is not static. Taking a single stool sample is like taking a single photograph of a bustling 8-lane intersection at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday and using that one photo to declare that you completely understand the city's entire traffic pattern for the year.
It's an incredibly incomplete snapshot of a moving target.
Completely. Furthermore, knowing what bacteria are present in a stool sample doesn't actually tell us what they're doing inside the mucosal layer of the intestine. A bacteria might be harmless in one person's gut environment, but highly inflammatory in another's. The science simply hasn't evolved to the point where a commercial test can definitively say, you have a 5% deficiency in bifidobacterium, therefore you must eat exactly 50 grams of asparagus every Tuesday. Doctors worry deeply that patients are making drastic, highly restrictive dietary changes based on fundamentally incomplete data, which ironically further starves their microbial diversity.
And that brings up the risks of aggressively trying to manipulate the system. What are the actual medical warning signs or contraindications when people start buying into the massive supplement hype?
One of the biggest risks is the uncontrolled use of megadose probiotics. Because of the hype, companies are selling capsules with 100 billion or 200 billion live bacteria. We discussed earlier that for a healthy person, these might just be passing tourists. But for someone with a compromised gut lining, a weakened immune system, or a condition called SIBO small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, dumping billions of live bacteria into the digestive tract, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Wait, explain SIBO, because that sounds like the opposite of what we want.
Right, the vast majority of your microbiome is supposed to live in the large intestine, the colon. The small intestine, where you absorb your nutrients, is supposed to be relatively sterile. SIBO occurs when bacteria from the colon inappropriately migrate up into the small intestine and take up residence there. When a patient with SIBO eats, these misplaced bacteria rapidly ferment the food before the human can absorb it, causing massive, painful bloating, gas, and severe nutrient malabsorption.
So if a patient has SIBO and they think, oh, I have gut issues, I should take a massive probiotic, they are actually just sending reinforcements to the invading army in the small intestine.
Exactly. It can severely exacerbate the condition. More bacteria is absolutely not always better. Location, balance, and context matter above all else.
And we also have to touch on the extremes of manipulation. Because when people are desperate, especially with severe weight issues or treatment-resistant depression, they look for radical solutions. And the most radical one right now is FMT, fecal microbiota transplants.
This is perhaps the most crucial warning we must discuss. FMT is a real FDA-approved medical procedure where stool from a thoroughly screened, healthy donor is processed and placed into a patient's colon, usually via colonoscopy. It's highly regulated, and it is a miraculous, life-saving treatment for a specific, severe, recurrent bacterial infection called C. difficile, which kills tens of thousands of people a year. For C. diff, FMT has a cure rate of over 90%.
But because it works so well for C. diff, people assume it will work for everything else.
Exactly. And there's a deeply disturbing, incredibly dangerous trend of people attempting DIY fecal transplants at home, using stool from their spouses or friends, trying to cure their obesity, their autism, or their depression. This is playing Russian roulette with your biology. Without rigorous clinical screening, you risk transferring massive pathogens, parasites, and undetected viruses.
And based on what we've discussed about the germ-free mice, you aren't just risking a stomach bug. If the donor has an undetected predisposition for severe anxiety or a highly efficient calorie-harvesting firmicutes profile, you could theoretically transfer a psychiatric or metabolic condition right into your own body.
Precisely. You could cure your digestive issue, but inherit severe depression. The ecosystem is entirely too complex, and the stakes for your health are far too high to treat this like a DIY science experiment. Furthermore, the biggest risk clinicians fear is the delay of necessary medical treatment. If a patient is suffering from clinical suicidal depression or dangerous metabolic syndrome, and they forego proven medical interventions, whether that's therapy-prescribed medication or medically supervised lifestyle changes, because they are convinced they just need to find the right probiotic to heal their gut, they can suffer irreversible, fatal harm. The microbiome is a critical piece of the puzzle. It is not the entire board.
I think that perfectly synthesizes why caution is required. We can map the terrain, we can explain the vagus nerve and the magic of short-chain fatty acids, but this deep dive cannot serve as personal medical advice. So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've torn up the old mechanical map. We've traced the chemical superhighways from the colon to the brain. We've looked at how bacteria steal tryptophan to make neurotoxins and how they harvest extra calories and manipulate our cravings. So what does this all mean? If you, the listener, had to explain the core takeaway of this investigation to a friend, what is the practical application of all this science?
The practical application is a fundamental shift in how you view your daily choices. You are not a solitary machine. You are the manager of a highly complex internal national park. Every time you eat, you are not just feeding human cells. You are selecting which populations of bacteria will thrive and which will die.
And practically speaking, how do we feed the right ones? We know popping a generic pill isn't the real answer.
The undisputed consensus in the scientific community is that dietary diversity, specifically diverse plant-based fibers, is the single most powerful lever you have. The goal isn't restriction, it's abundance. Researchers often cite a target of eating 30 different types of plant matter a week: seeds, legumes, vegetables, fruits, whole grains. This provides a wide variety of microbiota-accessible carbohydrates, or MS, ensuring that a diverse array of bacterial species have the specific fuel they need to produce those anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acids.
It's about cultivating a resilient rainforest inside yourself.
Exactly, and integrating traditional unpasteurized fermented foods like kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, high-quality yogurt. While these might not permanently colonize the gut, The transient microbes and the organic acids they produce in the fermentation process actively lower inflammation and support the integrity of the gut barrier. It's also about recognizing that diet is only one piece of the environment. Chronic stress releases cortisol, which physically alters gut motility and bacterial composition. Chronic sleep deprivation destroys microbial diversity. Your lifestyle is the environment.
And crucially, knowing when to call in a professional cartographer. If you are experiencing sudden, severe shifts in your mood, unexplained, rapid weight changes, or chronic, debilitating digestive pain, that is not the time to buy a sketchy supplement off the internet or attempt an extreme elimination diet. That is the time to have a serious conversation with a qualified healthcare professional who understands how to look at the entire interconnected map of your health.
Because the microbiome is a powerful, dynamic organ system. But it works in concert with your genetics, your environment, and your personal medical history. You cannot optimize one system while ignoring the rest.
As we wrap up this investigation, I want to leave you with a final thought that really builds on this idea of mapping human biology. We started this journey by talking about how we thought we had the human body perfectly mapped out, a self-contained, independent machine with a clear self and other. But if we accept the biological reality we've discussed today, if trillions of non-human organisms, possessing millions of genes that are entirely distinct from human DNA, are fundamentally intertwined with our metabolism, our daily cravings, our anxiety levels, and our baseline mood, then the map of human identity is not just human. It is a shared ecosystem.
In biology, the term for this is a holobiont, an assemblage of a host and the many other species living in or around it, which together form a discrete ecological unit. We were a superorganism.
It is a profound, almost unsettling realization. It makes you wonder, as we continue to push the boundaries of the science, how much of what we consider our core self, our willpower, our daily emotional state, our gut instincts, is actually just a microscopic community responding to its environment. Are we the captain driving the ship, or are we just the ship itself responding to the demands of trillions of tiny, invisible passengers?
This raises an important question, because as we chart this unknown territory, we aren't just looking for novel treatments for obesity or depression. We are fundamentally redefining what it means to be an individual. And that realization might completely redefine the future of medicine entirely.
It is a puzzle that we will be piecing together for a very long time. Keep questioning the map. Keep exploring the terrain.